discussion on the topic of Chinese and Russian hybrid threats, democratic resilience in Frontline states. I am Petra Németh, Vice President of the Association for Sustainable Democracy. This event is part of our online newspaper project called Milanna, and it is a co-organized with Political Capital and the Taipei Representative Office. We are very grateful for their cooperation. We are looking forward to a very exciting discussion as we welcome three respected experts on the subject. Elta Buziashvili, Research Associate, Atlantic Council from Georgia. I-chung, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Seoul University, Taiwan. Irina Subota, Head of Data Analytics Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security from Ukraine. They will discuss how to maintain a strong democracy in a world of hybrid threats and what are the obstacles of democratic values for states that are under constant pressure from the surrounding powers. Taiwan, Ukraine and Georgia have all experienced the ongoing challenges of hybrid threats. I do not need to emphasize how actual it is today to talk about the elements of Russian and Chinese mainland influence. But before this discussion takes place, the president of our association, who unfortunately could not attend due to other responsibilities, gives a short video welcome speech to briefly present what an organization focused on youth policy and sustainability has to do with this topic.
Gáspár Békés, the president of the Hungarian Association for Sustainable Democracy. I warmly welcome you to this very special event that's one of a kind, where we will discuss the front lines of democracy. We can see that there are several geopolitical areas where democracies are indeed threatened, either by external force or internal pressure. However, these things sometimes are intertwined, as we can see, for example, Russia's approach to hybrid warfare, as they spread misinformation, propaganda, and outright lies. We at the association firmly believe that it is through educating the youth that we can equip the future societies to be more resilient towards such pressures. Indeed, every decade, every century has its own challenges, and it's up to us citizens to figure out how we can best approach these subjects. Now, indeed, environmental change, climate change, and even wars are threatening our very existence and our daily lives, whether we talk about the energy crisis or flash floods. Thus, it is not enough to study static and basically statistical data in schools. We need to equip young people in general to be more receptive towards facts and to be able to differentiate between facts and propaganda. This we would certainly call critical thinking skills, and currently the Hungarian government is not interested in promoting this. However, through the power of information, especially through the internet, now young people in general can educate themselves better. Thus, if we promote them the right values and we put them on the right path, they can indeed be powerful allies in this. A society, a democratic society, is only as strong as its members. If you create a society where people don't care about politics, they don't care about participating in society or in politics in general, we will not be sustainable in democratic values. We will not be able to sustain democracy itself, because only a small group of very dedicated people towards some extremity will take power and hold on to power, as we can see by the Hungarian government's example. Therefore, democracy and sustainability is actually intertwined. Because if you don't have a democratically elected government that indeed has the best interest of humans or citizens at heart, then we won't have the necessary environmental legislation and consideration in government, which will eventually doom the earth and the country itself, leading first to crises, droughts, famines, indeed, which will collapse society itself. But if we don't have environmental, and if we don't have environmental sustainability, thus we don't have democratic sustainability. Thus, there is this very special link between these two subjects, and our association is always aiming to connect these two. Our projects and definitely focus on these areas. But we focus on youth especially because we believe that it is up to young people to change the future, and they will be the most affected. Also, they are the generation that is the most easy to influence in a positive way. They're more receptive towards approaches from digital media and to digital means. It's a cost-effective way of reaching large proportions of the population. We at the association always strive to find creative ways to engage youth, and this conference is of course a prime example of that. Also at this event, different branches of our organization came together, such as our newspaper Milenna and our main branch of the Association for Sustainable Democracy. We would like to thank our sponsors, which is the European Solidarity Corps, for sponsoring our journal and our newspaper, and of course this event itself. We wish you a fruitful discussion, and I'm very sorry that I cannot be there in person.
And now I give the floor to Rudolf Berkes, analyst of Political Capital, who will be our moderator today.
Thank you very much, Petra. I would like to also welcome everyone here at the Central European University and of course online. As Petra has said, I am Rudolf Berkes, analyst at Political Capital, and I will be moderating this event today. Russia has been trying to undermine sovereignty and integrity of different states throughout Europe, starting with Georgia in 2008 and then after Ukraine in 2014. And it has used coercive capital in political and information warfare to undermine democracies closer to Russia and also in Western Europe too. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 made it obvious that there is no such thing as the end of history in Europe. The People's Republic of China is playing a similarly aggressive geopolitical role in East Asia. Taiwan had been under constant military pressure from mainland China for decades, but recent development in the Taiwan Strait has increased these pressures, and the threats from Xi Jinping has raised questions about the possibility of a direct military attack against Taiwan as well. What can we expect in the following months? How can Taiwan maintain a healthy democracy against all odds? Our plan is to combine the experiences of frontline countries such as Taiwan, Georgia and Ukraine in order to find similarities, differences and best practices to combat hybrid threats and increase democratic resilience. My first question is that let us look to the Far East. Taiwan has the longest history of withstanding authoritarian pressures, both conventional and hybrid. My question to you is that what is the Taiwanese experience of grey zone warfare, and what are the tools that China uses to pressure Taiwan?
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for having me here. And I think it's very important for democracies, people in democracies to cooperate together, because we face very common challenges from our neighbor big countries, especially big dictatorships. And for example, if you see the reasons why President Putin wants to use force against Ukraine, you replace every Russia to China and replace every Ukraine to Taiwan is almost the same. So we see almost a very similar situation there. And so China has a very clear goal of unifying Taiwan, and it's a very clear territorial ambition. So, but still, China and Taiwan is very close to each other geographically, so we maintain a large number of people-to-people interaction and also for trade volume. So, under these circumstances, China always use the so-called sticks and carrots methods toward Taiwan. So first of all, China provides a lot of beneficial policies. For example, they provide a lot of working opportunities and also scholarship to attract students from all over the levels to study or to work in China. And of course, we have a lot of investment from the business to China as well. And China, in the past 2 decades, provide a lot of beneficial policies like tax cut and to provide some land and many other policies as well. And right now, China is trying to push for unification by sometimes they will use sanctions. For example, when Taiwan's industry, some industry, for example, agricultural industry, agricultural and some other kinds of industry, we export a lot of products to China. But China, when they are angry about what Taiwanese leaders saying, and then or sometimes when China is dissatisfied with is Taiwan's relationship with other countries, then China will use a sanction. So, for example, during this year, there are several times that China banned the export of Chinese agricultural products, including pineapple and other kinds of fruits. And then we'll, because our fruits, like for example, our pineapple, they are maybe very high percent. I forgot the number, but it's about 70–80% of our export goes to China. So there will be a big loss when they have the ban. So it wants to pressure Taiwanese government to do something or to say something that is in favors in China's side. So that's one. So another side is a more conventional way. So after 2016, after the current Taiwan administration took power, we see more and more Chinese fighter jets and also the vessels to sail around Taiwan. Especially they frequently pass the so-called the median line of the Taiwan Strait. The median line is a virtual line that is drawn after the World War II by the Americans. So the Americans says that okay, you both sides have to maintain peace and nobody can just pass this median line, so that you can be maybe calm down when you are angry about each other, and then there's just a line there. But in recent years, China more and more frequently just they pass the line purposely. So and the frequency just skyrocketed after, especially after 2018. So in recent months, especially after the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit, I think there are each day there are maybe 20 to 30 passes of that median line. So they just send aircraft, fighter jets to cross the line and go back, and cross the line and go back, something like that. So they just want to intimidate Taiwan. That so to show that they are very angry that we are maintaining a very good relationship with the U.S. So after the Party Congress of CCP this time, they in their report they emphasize that they will not give up using force against Taiwan. That is not new, but this time what is new is that they list two reasons on the circumstance that they will use force. The first one is that foreign intervention of the Taiwan Strait issue. So, and the second one is that if Taiwan makes it in a legally independence. So it is very new that they put the emphasis of preventing a foreign intervention prior to preventing Taiwan's independence. This time, after the Party Congress. So anytime if Taiwan just sit there doing nothing, they can still use force against Taiwan because so you are maintaining a very good relationship with the U.S. or maybe with the Europe or other countries. Then they are angry, so they can use force. So that is their latest policy right now. So during the past 7 decades after 1949, the end of the Civil War, China is using the conventional military threats, but recently we see a lot of more new kinds of threats, which is hybrid threats right now, the topics today. So maybe we will talk about that in later. So basically, it is very similar to what the Russians did to many other countries. So many content farms from Russia and from China, they are pouring out a lot of messages, in controversial messages that they are aiming to cause more untrustness towards the government. And they want to attack the legitimacy of the democracies. So they are targeting citizens who are less linked to the political parties and who are less interested in the public affairs, and they just attack political institutions and attacks some problems of democracy. So they enlarge the problems of democracy. They want people to become more supportive of the big countries like China and Russia. So that's the main the main topic, the main problem we are facing right now. So I think I just stop here and we'll join the discussion later. Yeah.
Sure. Let's move closer to Europe. Georgia was invaded by Russia in 2008, and since then there is essentially a frozen conflict between the two countries. Russia, in this way, Russia is trying to prevent Georgia to move closer to the European Union and to NATO. My question is to Eto, is that what tactics are being used by Russia to achieve its goals, and what are the effects on the Georgian society?
Thank you, Rodolphe. Actually, I would say it's not that much frozen, because yes, Abkhazia and Srin Valley region, the South Ossetia, they are occupied, but what Russia is doing in the kinetic dimension, they're slowly moving so-called borders inside Georgia. And we call it creeping occupation or creeping annexation, when they are installing some so-called barbed wires or fences or so-called signs of borders. Basically, on a daily basis, some Russian soldiers or FSB guys, they're coming and just moving border a bit inside into territory which is currently controlled by the central government of Georgia. In addition to this kinetic threat, which basically divides families, houses, neighborhoods into two, like one day you just go to bed and sleep in Georgia, and you wake up and you are already in the occupied part of Georgia. So in addition to these kinetic threats, there are many influence directions that Russia is trying to use in Georgia. First of all, it's a Kremlin-funded NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which started to pop up like mushrooms in Georgia since Russia's 2008 military invasion of Georgia. There were many organizations which claimed to be independent, but of course financed and managed by the Kremlin. The majority of these organizations had a so-called educational vector, like focusing more on education, like for example, sharing some Russian language lessons or the culture dedicated lessons, etc. They were also the ones who were giving the scholarships to Georgian citizens to study, to get education in Russia. And these scholarships were increasing yearly in Georgia. But interestingly, these organizations, majority of them, de facto suspended their activities because they were not that much popular in Georgia, but the representatives and founders of these organizations moved to more public sphere, which is media and politics. And currently they are the members of the political parties, or they are running their Russian media entities. Which leads to the second vector of Russian influence, which is extremist and far-right political parties and groups. And Georgia has seen the emergence of the far-right political parties and groups for already the last couple of years. There were like two pro-Russian parties, like the big ones, but now there are more of them. For example, one of the political parties is trying to push anti-Turkish messages because their strategy is to move our attention from the real threat, which is coming from Russia, and shift this attention to Turkey. Basically, they are claiming that Turkey is the same existential threat to Georgia as Russia. So don't look just Russia's way. See what Turkey is doing in the country. Another party, for example, is doing the same, but they are demonizing Azerbaijan, claiming that, you know, Azerbaijan is same threat as Russia. And of course, both political parties are trying to spread anti-Western messages, to demonize everything that is connected to the West. And it's important because Georgian society is a conservative one, where religion and tradition play a very important role. It means that Georgians are very sentimental when it comes to these topics. So of course, what these parties and other actors are trying to do to instrumentalize these topics and basically say that the West is a very much threat to Georgia because they are against your religion, they are against your tradition, so you shouldn't really be friends with the West. Then comes the far-right groups, which are organizing violence against pro-Western activists, democracy activists, the journalists, LGBTQ community, and they have been already translating their online hate speech into offline, and I'll elaborate on that later. When last year on July 5 there was one of the darkest days in the modern history of Georgia, when many people were beaten up by this pro-Russian far-right aggressive mob. Then of course comes the online space, which we have been researching for many years. First of all, Facebook. Facebook is the #1 popular platform in Georgia, and it's kind of a war theater. It's where the majority of influence operations are taking place. Then of course there are web pages which are operating in Georgian. And of course Russia does know that they shouldn't be using Russian language, but they are investing in local language to gain more trust and to spread their disinformation narratives through these websites. 2020 was a very interesting year in terms of elections, and we documented multiple attempts by Russia to interfere into Georgian elections. There were two prominent cases when Facebook took down the networks of Sputnik and Newsfront, two most famous Russian online platforms, which tried to deceive Georgian Facebook users and tried to spread some anti-Western messages and demonize the anti-Western actors while promoting some the messages which were describing Russia in a good way. Then of course there are some anonymous actors which are using some entertaining names of Facebook pages and groups, like for example dedicated to movies, dedicated to I don't know, music. They are trying to grow their audience with these topics, but they have the alternative agenda, like the covert one, to spread the political content under the camouflaged image. Then of course cyber attacks, which Georgia has been facing for many years. Cyber attacks, part of which were attributed directly to Russia's military intelligence. They are trying to sow fear in Georgian society and to make them think that they are not defended online, and that they can be compromised, and their data can be, I don't know, available everywhere. And there were, before 2020 elections, like prior to election cycle, there were 3 cyber attacks on Georgia, after which the government websites, the NGOs which are pro-Western, they were all attacked. Then we see the emergence of Telegram after Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine, basically after February 24, when Telegram became one of the main battle spaces for information. It's becoming more and more popular in Georgia too. I will maybe stop here, and I have a couple of points to elaborate maybe later, or
Sure.
some other observations and what we are doing and what can be done more. Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, we cannot talk about democratic resilience and hybrid threats without mentioning Ukraine, since Ukraine has an enormous and crucial experience over the last 8 years about about hybrid threats coming from, especially from Russia. So my question is to Irina that how hybrid warfare affected Ukraine over the last year and why has it failed to undermine democracy and unity in the country?
Yes, I want to start with that since 2014 Ukraine has faced many threats that today we call it hybrid warfare. And in my speech I want to admit that threats that can or could be used by Russia against Ukrainian society and especially young population of our country. For example, the first one is information threats. This is, I talk about propaganda, disinformation, manipulations, and information psychological operations that spreading online by the media and by the other channels. Since 2014, Russia discredits Ukraine and all our democratic movements. Also, it is military threats and occupation and annexation of Ukrainian territories. Crimea, Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and now all of Ukraine. Ukraine has been under these threats for 8 years. Next one is culture. Long before 2014, Russia used culture and in particular the mass media to discredit Ukraine. For example, TV series about Ukrainian heroes showed us as a short-sighted heroes, thus constructing a discredited image of Ukrainians for the Russian audience and an inferiority complex for the Ukrainian audience. Cyber attacks. In particular, on February 15, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the largest cyber attack in the history of our country was carried out. In a couple of hours, banks and governments' websites became unavailable. Of course, we have for today the experience to understand how Russian propaganda works in the temporarily occupied territories. And first of all, it is important to admit some channels and methods used by Russia on the temporarily occupied territories. The spread and planting of disinformation narratives of the Russian Federation in the temporarily occupied territories is happening to all population groups. The so-called occupying power creates its own government, so-called government websites of the temporarily occupied territories. For example, at least 6 these web pages be found in the Kherson region. For the residents of the temporarily occupied territories, the Russian invaders create their own local media, such as TV channels and so on. Russian occupiers use the feelings of Ukrainian editorial offices, TV channel branches, and created different local channels in Telegram and other social medias. Of course, the Russian Federation is planting its own narratives in the field of education as well. In particular, we know the cases that in schools of the temporarily occupied territories, Ukrainian teachers are forced to teach in Russian and according to Russian curricula. Also, a media school was being opened for the adult population in temporarily occupied Kherson, where Russian propagandists teach them. Of course, Russian occupiers distribute even leaflets with propaganda narratives and anti-Ukrainian appeals there. For example, in March, residents of Melitopol received leaflets that, in addition to Russian narratives, contained a list of Russian propaganda Telegram channels which the local population was encouraged to subscribe to. And now also let's see how Russia tried to do the same with all Ukraine, but before the full-scale invasion. Russian TV channels carried propaganda on Ukrainian TV. Russian social networks, which were under the control of the Russian Federation, Federal Security Services and bot farms, were used to collect personal data of Ukrainians and manipulate public opinion. Russian internet services were used for espionage and computer programs for hacker attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure facilities. This is the answer why limit their consumption and using by Ukraine is not a censorship. And the experience on the temporarily occupied territory is a huge evidence for this as well. Since 2014, Ukraine has understood the danger of the Kremlin's information weapons and began to gradually limit its influence on our citizens. In particular, all Russian TV channels, informational and even entertainment, were thrown out of cable networks. Also prohibited Russian social networks like Odnoklassniki and Vkontakte, restricted the use of computer programs of Russian developers, restricted the use of internet services of Russian developers like Yandex and so on, and closed pro-Russian Ukrainian TV channels. And now we also ask to do the same with Russia Today in that countries that continue to spread this disinformation for all the world. So maybe I stopped here with this method that Russia used against Ukrainian society.
Thank you.
You have to add one.
Yeah, sure.
I think again, everything you can replace Russia to China, and you can replace Georgia and Ukraine to Taiwan. Everything is very, very similar. So, I want to add one thing here is that the Chinese and the Russian informational warfare, they reinforce each other. We don't have a concrete evidence that both countries, both people from, their team of information warfare cooperate physically, but it will reinforce each other. Let me give you an example here. After the Ukraine war, so the Chinese information warfare and the content forms translate President Putin's speech into Mandarin, and then it put this kind of message to Taiwanese, saying that, okay, you see, so you should not connect to the West, especially the U.S. and they should not connect to, just like they should not connect to EU and NATO, so that you should not provoke the big country. So we should listen to the big country, and then we will have a stability or peace or something like that. So they use President Putin and the Russian military to coerce Taiwanese people that, okay, you see, this is a very severe outcome if you don't listen to the big countries. So they reinforce each other, and they will customize or localize the message. So they use the materials. And also, I think Russian and the Chinese, they have common enemy of the US. So right, so a lot of controversial messages about the US. So the US led NATO, the US led global alliance that is against China, against dictatorship. So they will attack democracy and democratic systems in US and in Europe to maybe to just downgrade our legitimacy or our trust on the democratic system. So I think it's very similar to, the problem we face is very, very similar.
Yeah, I will just add briefly that democracy is democracy in general is their common enemy. But it's very concerning to see how these authoritarian regimes are using democratic tools against democracy. Like, for example, social media. It's one of the democratic tools for everybody to be engaged and to express themselves freely. And then they are using all the deceiving tactics on social media to just kill democracy, to interfere in elections, to artificially promote some ideas and artificially undermine others. Yeah, it is one of the dangerous trends that we're observing. But also, yeah, to just add on what you said, how these authoritarian regimes are just replicating basically more China using like Russian playbook, but in Georgia, just to be very brief, Chinese influence operations are not that much visible. They maintain low-key. There are some websites which are operating in Georgia, like a couple of them, but they are clearly connected with the Chinese Communist Party, because these websites, for example, which were operating in Georgian language, they promoted China in general, the ruling party, China's leader, while on the other hand they were discrediting Joe Biden, the American president, and America in general. But again, these are very separated cases. In Georgian case, it's academia and NGOs sector where Chinese influence is more visible, like the scholarships, the cooperation, promotion of China, etc.
So we have been hearing about similar experiences regarding traditional and hybrid threats in all of the examined countries. But how did the traditional security establishment in the countries, such as the military, secret services, and other government agencies, reacted to these threats? What is new in their methods to resist these pressures, and how do they deal with these non-classic, non-traditional threats?
I mean, for the military side, so there's two different dimensions. So the first one is that we have to prepare for the battlefield, right? It's a more conventional way. So our military is preparing and to improving our mobilization system, and also to improve our equipment. And we are trying to get different kinds of arms sales from the U.S. And the problem is that the U.S. is maybe the only source for Taiwan to purchase the arms, the weapons, because of the Chinese diplomatic isolation. So we have some problem of upgrading our military equipment and the weapon systems. But yeah, so the first one is that if there's a war or there's an armed conflict, we have to win it, right? So that's one. But secondly, the Chinese hybrid threat. They want to downgrade our morals in the military, and also they want to downgrade our self-defense determinants. So we see a lot of informational warfare is attacking, first of all, Taiwan and the U.S. relationship, because the U.S. is the major supporters of Taiwan in the international politics, or maybe Japan, and so there's informational warfare that's triggering more the U.S. skepticism. So they are saying that the U.S. politicians are making their own good, and they will abandon Taiwan anytime, and they will not back up Taiwan if there's a war or something like that. And even though, for example, the latest example is that we are making some foreign direct investment to the U.S., and then the information warfare will tell us that, okay, you see, the U.S. is trying to steal Taiwan's technology, or steal Taiwan's some supply chain, something like that. And it's ridiculous, but many people will believe that because there's a very large amount of information about this. And the problem, a severe problem is that our media will echo this kind of controversial issues, because yeah, it's a hidden influence by China, because China will buy a lot of advertisement and funding, provide some fundings to the traditional media, and our media will just enlarge this kind of messages for China. So I think in order to defend or to prevent such an influence, I think yeah, there are multiple ways. So for example, in the civil society, we do fact-check institutions, and most of the factual institutions are consist of the voluntaries, so just people gather together and to make some mechanisms to do the fact check, and then some of the factual institutions they cooperate with technology companies like Facebook, Google, and some communication apps to make some plugins that we can automatically check whether the news or information is true or not. And also there comes some research organizations. So this research organizations will detect whether this kind of message are from maybe China or from some specific content forms. And then there's some educational system or educational organization that promotes media literacy. I think that's a very basic one. If we increase the media literacy, then those kind of informational warfare will be less influential. Yeah. So I think there's lots thing to do.
Yeah, I would say same for Georgia. Basically, trying to fuel negative emotions and try to sow fear in Georgian society that there might be a war, and that's why we should appease Russia, and there should be no military cooperation with the U.S. because they want to drag you with in war. But interestingly and sadly, these messages for many years have been these lies and disinformation narratives. They have been spread by the Kremlin actors or the pro-Kremlin actors, like the actors that we knew that either were representatives of these far-right groups, political parties, Kremlin media, etc. But for now, unfortunately, Georgian government has joined these narratives. It's been basically since Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine, we're seeing how the government representatives, including Prime Minister and other key officials, are saying the same. They're trying to sow fear of war in Georgian society, and basically they are saying that the US and EU, they want to open the second front in Georgia along with Ukraine and to drag Georgia into war with Russia. So it is again, I mean, in Georgia, the majority of population, up to 80%, like 80%, they are pro-EU and NATO. It means that it's our aspiration to become the part of big Euro-Atlantic family. We also put it in our constitution that we should and we will becoming the part of NATO and EU. And this is a goal of Russia, to undermine this large support and to use these various means. And unfortunately, we're seeing the same done by our current government in Georgia. And the last but not least, I mentioned the July 5 incident, which happened last year, and I wanted to elaborate a bit more on that. I'm frequently asked, okay, but what is the offline impact of online disinformation? It just stays online. No, it does not. And it is always translated into offline in short, mid, or long terms. In Georgia, for example, last year, July 5 marked one of the darkest days in history of modern Georgia. What happened was that there's a one pro-Russian far-right group which lately transformed into a political party. Their name is Alt-Info. Basically, what these guys have been doing, they have been using Facebook for many years to spread to demonize the West, like the US and EU. They were making Georgian society fear that there will be, I don't know, some Westerners who will be coming to Georgia and make gay marriages legal. Or, I don't know, there will be some laws that will contradict your tradition and religion. And they were not taken seriously. So what happened was that on July 5 last year, the LGBTQ organization in Georgia, they wanted to organize a rally in the center of the capital and called on their supporters to just go there and support human rights and freedom of speech, that everybody is equal. So when people started gathering, the supporters of these far-right groups, they came there and they beat up the demonstrators. Interestingly, the majority of the beaten up there were journalists, which are pro-Western, which are representatives of the pro-Western media in Georgia. And of course, they were targets from the very beginning. And unfortunately, one of the cameramen died after these injuries. But again, this was the result of how online disinformation translates into offline in many cases.
So, and I want to add to my colleagues, I agree with you, and from my point of view, there are no one or two effective methods in counteracting the pressure or hybrid threats, because we need to have the system that that connect and include of counteracting and preventive measures, and they need to work comprehensively. For example, in Ukraine, we have a great number of information security organizations that focus on a specific method, and of course we have organizations, public organizations that use some of them, of these methods together. And for instance, among these methods, if I talk about information security of our country, these are fact-checking and positive narrativization, the monitoring of information space, of course use of big data to identify the informational threats, and development of information policy, so on. The power of these institutions and organizations in their interaction and cooperation together to against our enemy. We think that there should be a cooperation system between the civil and state sectors for counteracting hybrid threats as well.
Thank you. And to what extent does the government change its approach? For example, did it pursue a broader definition of threats and how to protect the population for it? For example, did it improve the education system to give more media literacy education to young people, or is there a way for young people to be mobilized into political action from the civil sector? What is your experience in your countries?
I think in terms of counteracting about the informational warfare, what the government do, the government cannot stand in the front line. I mean, because it will have a backfire effect. So according to the research, if the government collect some information, then the group who are trying to attack the government will utilize this to attack again on the government. And people tend not to believe on the government information because they tend to believe that, okay, so because the characteristic of the controversial issues is always about the emotions and about some exaggeration of the government. I mean, especially for the government. So the government itself, what the government can do is to provide some information, and then to cooperate with some civil groups. So the civil groups from the third parties, they can provide some fact check, and then they can cooperate with some research groups, just as I mentioned. They have the tools to detect whether this kind of controversial issues are from specific groups like China's content farms or other places. So what the government can do is to they have to respond, but I think the main job of them is to provide information, and then the civil society will do the fact check, and then to deal with the interactions on the Facebook and other social media pages. So if the government do too much, then people will doubt that, okay, so you are interfering our freedom of speech or something like that. So this is on the controversial issue itself. But in the long run, yes, the government should provide more training programs of media literacy. So our government is trying to do that. For as far as I know, we have some training programs for the high school and the middle school teachers. We have some books, but mainly published by the civil groups and some research foundations. They have some cooperation with the government to write some books and to write some materials that can teach teachers how to teach about the media literacy. So we have such kind of programs. I think it's very important for government to do the long-term program to just increase the media literacy.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree that, for example, having a subject at school which teaches critical thinking from the very beginning is crucial, I would say. Yeah, in Georgia, the countermeasures against online influence operations is purely on the shoulders of NGO sector and media. There are other organizations which are working and researching influence operations and disinformation, and they're doing fact-checking as well. We, for example, Atlantic Council is a US think tank, and we, DFR Lab, is one of the centers at the Atlantic Council. And we're doing two things. We're working all around the world, and Georgia is one of the countries. We're doing two things, producing researches, and in our researches we're describing in very details how we did this research. Because we believe that if we explain and our mission is to identify, expose, and explain this information, and we do the highest emphasis on explaining part. Because if you share the approach so that everybody is able to replicate it themselves, it will definitely have the result. Another thing that we're doing is we're conducting trainings and sharing our experience of using online analysis tools to expose disinformation and online influence operations. And there are a variety of online, like OSINT, like open source intelligence. And there are a variety of tools, like the paid ones and unpaid ones. How to research Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or how to verify images or videos, or how to geolocate some militaries which are claiming to be somewhere and they are not. So these tools help. If people are equipped with these tools, it will help them to become more resilient, to know how and where to verify in a very quick moment. For example, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was a very interesting case. So invasion happened on February 24, and on February 18, two so-called heads of states of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, they claimed that Ukraine was going to attack, and they declared the evacuation because of the imminent threat. And when they published these videos, our colleagues in Bellingcat, they were very quick to check the metadata of their videos. Metadata is data about data, basically shows when the video was created, from which device, etc. They checked the metadata and they found that these videos, which were published on February 18th and claiming imminent threat that they knew that day, they were recorded 2 days earlier, because the metadata showed that they were recorded on February 16th. And it was one of the biggest exposure that Russia was basically staging everything. Another instance, my colleague and I did research prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Again, we used open source data, everything which is available. We studied 10 Kremlin media, online ones. I mean, they are not media, like online outlets, which were pushing some claims that Ukraine is going to attack Russia. And this started, and these claims were intensifying starting from November. We just measured dimensions of the words like provocation, attack, Ukraine, etc. We did some combinations with these words, and we counted and we described how these claims were increasing. And we were able to draw a conclusion in already early February or mid-February that Russia is highly likely going to attack, because there is a high uptick and increase of these claiming narratives, and this is highly likely how they are preparing and setting the stage for the invasion. So these kind of knowledge, how to use tools, how to scrape data, and how to analyze them, of course, will make our societies resilient, and of course, researchers who will be able to just foresee some developments.
In my opinion, the role of government is in cooperation with civil society, as I said about this. In Ukraine, we have so much civil organizations that provide fact-checking, that provide research, and of course we have some methods or approaches in counteracting hybrid threats that can done by government or by civil society as well. For example, when I talk about the development of the brand of the country and spreading it to the international area as a preventive measure for a young democratic state that is just beginning its way of position itself on international area. So these methods can be done by civil society and can be done by government. Or for example, when we talk about information and communication about situation in our country, again in the world. And of course, when we talk about education and media literacy, that is important as well, like the methods against hybrid threats. So these like trainings and lessons can be done by government structures and institutions, and of course it can done by civil society as well.
And when since there is the invasion and the ongoing war in Ukraine, how does these efforts compare to the war efforts? Is this the fight against disinformation and misinformation and inside of Ukraine and educating the population to withstand these information offensive is a crucial part to the war effort, or there is like a more material approach, for example, fixing the electricity grid and making shelters and gathering food, and what is the relationship between the two, the materials one in the information in the information space?
I think when we talk about materials and information space, we talk that Russia pressure in the both ways. So we can see the both ways. So it is very connect. Two ways very connect in this warfare against Ukraine by Russia, and of course from our side we have the cooperation between different ways to counteract these threats from Russia, not only information space, of course, when we talk about military threats and when we talk maybe some else threats that not connect with information space. Of course, this is the power to cooperate in such cases when we have the war, and this is the most power to cooperate between all levels, between all states and so on. So
maybe can I just
Yeah,
add
sure.
something here? So sorry to say this, but we have learned a lot from Russia's invasion this time, because in the very beginning of the war, I think in the first maybe 48 hours or 72 hours, there's a lot of information from Russia, and then it's translated by Chinese into in Taiwan. So we see a lot of information about, okay, so the Russia will defeat the Ukraine very quickly, and
Kiev will fall in 3 days.
yeah, in maybe 2 or 3 days, yes. And then it has a lot of bad story about President Zelensky saying that he's going to escape. And then, as I said, the messages are highly localized, so it will compare with our president, saying that, okay, you see, our president will escape immediately if there's a war between China and Taiwan, and something like that. So you always see that a lot of comparison that so how strong is the Russian army and how weak is the Ukraine, and then again those message want to tell Taiwanese people to surrender if there's a war, and then everything will point out to the U.S. capitalism that, okay, so you see, if you have a very good relationship with the West, and then you will have a war, something like that. It's highly localized, and they respond to the war very quickly in Taiwan. So even though it's geographically very distant, but we see a lot of threats in the same time.
And for example, what did Taiwan and Georgia learn from the Ukrainian example of how they used hybrid threats and hybrid warfare to prepare for like an outright military invasion? What can we learn from that for the two respective countries?
Yeah, I think the one thing is that we will have a lot of fake news and controversial issues in the very beginning, so we have to resist that. And second one is that we know at the very beginning we will see a destruction of our basic infrastructures very soon. So we may lose our electricity, we may lose our power and water or something like that. So I think our government, maybe, I don't know a specific plan, but I think we learn about that. But another problem is that the Chinese army is also learning from the war, so they know that if they cannot do it very quickly, then they will face a lot of backfire, and especially some response from all over the world. So yeah, so our enemy, I mean, the Chinese army is also learning. So yeah, so this is dynamic relationship that both of us we have to learn a lot, and we have to get prepared.
Yeah, I would highlight two things in the information dimension. First of all, that Ukrainian officials are very quick in responding to the Kremlin lies. If, for example, there is a deepfake video making Zelensky say that, oh, I'm leaving Ukraine, I'm running out of Kiev, Zelensky comes, I don't know, in 2 minutes, and he records his video from, I don't know, from the heart of Kiev, how he is there and he is not going to surrender. And so are the other institutions and other high officials who are just very quick in debunking and in providing real information. So there is no information vacuum. It's not left to the Kremlin. And the second thing, that it is great and crucial when you have the allies, not only in the government, but in the ordinary people as well. Because the movements that we see online, we were talking today earlier about NAFO movement, like the North Atlantic fellow organizations, which just arose on Twitter, like, I don't know, and grew in scale in a couple of days. It's amazing, because these are just voluntaries from all over the world who are just supporting Ukraine's freedom, democracy, and they are fighting against the Kremlin allies online. Like, nobody asked them, they are just there to help. Yeah, these two things I would highlight the most.
We have the very similar one called Milk Tea Alliance, because in Asian countries, Taiwan is very famous for the milk tea, right? and other Asian countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and some other countries, they have different kinds of famous teas. So on Twitter, we have a Milk Tea Alliance, the hashtag Milk Tea Alliance, that every time when we see something bad in China, or when Chinese netizens are attacking to other countries, then the netizens from the so-called Milk Tea Alliance will come up and then fight back to the Chinese netizens. So I think that is very a precious experience, that because we will see a lot of informational attack, then there's some voluntary netizens online from democratic countries to fight back.
Yeah, and I should actually highlight here, and that first ones were Lithuanians who created this kind of movement during Russia's first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, when Lithuanian elves came to fight Russian trolls, and then they grew and they were just seen in a number of countries, including Georgia. So this kind of self-organized movements online, which are there, which are they are the most democratic movements ever, because there is a platform that everybody can be engaged and participate. This is an amazing tool that we all have there.
So do you think that these kind of methods and practices can be like scanned and make it customized for each country which is suffering from huge disinformation offensives from Russia or China, for that matter? Do you think that these methods can be copied, essentially?
I think that's part of the efforts to fight back against the hybrid threat. So that is a part of the civil society, but mostly I think it will go back to our conventional approach as well. So for example, our collaboration of the intelligence units in each country. I think that's the most important part. For example, this time in the Ukraine war, in Taiwan, I remember that time everybody goes to the page of I think it's UK's page of intelligence. So we believe on the information there is true. So I think that's it's very important for from the allies and the government institutions, especially from the intelligence institutions. So that because they are very resourceful, they have the authority to do that, to fight back. So the civil society do our part, and then the government do their part, and then we cooperate together, and I think that's the most effective way.
That can work in Taiwan, where the government is willing to work with the civilian sector, but other countries such as Georgia or in fact Hungary is quite a different case. What can civil society and do in these kind of environments?
Well, very well noted. Yeah, I mean the thing that Georgian civil society is trying to do is to first to cooperate among themselves inside Georgia, but also to cooperate with outside actors, with the civil societies and NGOs in the Western countries, as well as Western governments and some other actors, because again, the civil society, I mean the NGOs and media is the front line against fighting against the Kremlin threats. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't see some communication from the government agencies, which are, for example, publishing some official reports on communicating with people what they should be afraid of, where are some main vectors of influence. For example, Estonia or Lithuania, they do amazing job. Their intelligence services, they are publishing annual reports where they communicate the specific cases to their citizens. For example, one of my favorite instances was when in 2021, I think it was Lithuania's intelligence service, which in detail wrote about the Yevgeny Prigozhin's case. Maybe you have heard about this case. So Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's one of the Putin's ally, and he's a founder of Wagner private military company, which is not private but used by Russia in various countries. He's founder of St. Petersburg troll factory, like all the worst things that is happening in Russia. So in 2021, Lithuanian intelligence service exposed highly likely Kremlin operation, they found a guy who looked like Yevgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin is sanctioned by US and EU. It means that he cannot enter Lithuania, right? So what they did, they found a guy who looked similar to Prigozhin. They issued a passport which said that his name was Yevgeny Prigozhin. He had the same birth date and all the information. And they were waiting for Lithuania if they would let him in or not. And of course, Lithuania, after doing some security check, they let him in because he was not Yevgeny Prigozhin, despite he looked like him and he had the same name. And what the Kremlin media did, so this guy went to Lithuanian ministries, the buildings, he took some photos, and on the second day, Kremlin media took these photos and they were saying, see, Yevgeny Prigozhin is holding some meetings with Lithuanian government, he is highly welcome. See, Lithuania is part of NATO and EU, and they are not trusted allies. These guys are just letting Prigozhin in. And what Lithuanian intelligence service did, they just wrote about this case. And they told to their citizens that, see, these kind of things might be happening. And basically not only with their citizens, but they communicated with everybody. These are like hybrid threats, like, I don't know, the mixture of physical and online. When you are first using a person who looks like Prigozhin, and then you make your so-called media outlets to write about this. Amazing case of communicating the threats with your citizens.
Well, thank you very much, and I would like to open this panel up to questions from the audience here in the room, and of course from online as well. If there are questions or comments regarding each of the countries' experiences or recommendations from these experts.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I would be interested like what effects of the EU sanctions on Russia can you feel in your everyday life? Or what can you predict?
I can see that Russia continue to spread the narrative that the Europe sanctions don't work for it, and continue to spread this narrative not only for a Russian audience, but also for European audience and for USA audience. We see that from our monitorings for our research, using the channels, Russian propaganda continue to explain to Europe that Europe will have problem after these sanctions. But in fact, we see that Europe sanctions work, and Russia just try to discredit in such a way these actions, but they in fact really have many problems in Russia in particular in the result of these sanctions. Recently we check their media landscape, and we see that sometimes they try even to write that something is not good, so that even in the media sometimes we can see the news that try to explain that something goes wrong after these sanctions.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes?
I would like to ask two questions. One
Sure.
is, I would like to ask the lady from Georgia.
Please,
that,
could you speak up?
Could you please tell me the name of the study you did for the uptick in mentioning
Yes, the word.
Ukraine will attack Russia? This
Sure.
study, could you tell me?
Yeah, it was done by my colleague and I can send you the link
Yeah,
after.
that would
Yeah.
be great.
Absolutely.
Okay. And the other thing is, I would like to ask the whole panel maybe, do you know any other country besides Hungary, because I saw the TV channel, M1. I guess in October, I was feeding my dogs and I heard from the M1 TV channel that they just published a report with Denis Pushilin. I think he's the so-called Luhansk Republic's leader or something like that, and he was talking like 5 minutes in the same channel that Ukrainian terrorists just bombed our square. You see, this is dead bodies all over. So, is there any other country in Europe which that could just in the government channel just pure this? I don't want to say it, but just pure. No fact check, no nothing.
M1 is the state media channel in Hungary.
I made a guess.
Yes. As we monitor media landscape of different countries, we can see that in maybe almost each country we can find some Russian messages or program or news that repeat Russian narratives, Russian propaganda. This happens because Russian propaganda has so many channels in each country that they can spread their own messages through these channels, and sometimes it can be even websites, news websites. They haven't, for example, the information that this is Russian website or this is Kremlin website, but in fact this website can be manipulated by Russia, by Kremlin, and spread these narratives in the specific country. Maybe in September, it was researched by NewsGuard that in Europe there were 250 news websites that repeat Russian propaganda, and in fact they understand that this news website is from Russia. But actually we can't see this information just only on the website. This happens after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, and after many countries banned such channels like RT, Russia Today, Sputnik, and maybe others Russian channels. Russia continued to spread their narrative through these anonymous websites in almost each country.
I can just add, as my colleague spoke about some intentional ways to spread these lies. There are of course some other unintentional steps that are done by unfortunately some Western media, and it is done in the name of balance. There were some instances when, for example, some very well-known media outlets, they were equalizing the statements done by Ukraine and done by Russia. For example, they were presenting this all as something like equal. For example, Ukraine says it was very visible during Russia's first invasion of Ukraine. For example, they were writing the following. Ukraine says that Russia is continuing its war, or Russia is, invading, etc. And then they were writing that, yes, but Russia is denying. And it was stopping here. Well, when in reality they should have done, like Ukraine is saying this, Russia is denying, despite there being many facts of Russia doing this. So this kind of reporting in the name of balance, where both sides were presenting, is very dangerous when it's not followed by facts. Fortunately, these kind of instances are decreased for now, but we still see some both-sidism in the reporting as well for today.
We got a very similar problem for that. So again, yeah. So our media often reflect or resonate the Chinese information, and sometimes for the purpose of getting more clicks and likes, and sometimes because of their I mean the high level officials in the media, traditional media, they are kind of pro-China. I mean, so they are pro-China and anti-US in a very high level. So they often do this, and also I'm also tired of the balance one. So an example is that recently our state media established a new the whole English program. So we have an English program to provide Taiwanese views on international politics, and always there's two people speaking. One is pro-China and one is for Taiwan. So I mean, there's the proportion of pro-China people is much less than 50%, right? But if you, in terms of balance, you have to put one pro-China people there. So it's I'm also always very tired about this kind of balance.
When we're talking about lies,
Yeah.
lies should not be reported equally as truth, like something that is another side's thing. No, they shouldn't be reported at all, or they should be followed up by fact-check sentence.
Yes.
So back to the technology word, or like the E-word. Elon Musk bought Twitter and allowed people who had been banned to re-register. For example, Trump. What consequences do you see, and what can we do, like for example from here, Hungary, or from all around the world, do to support you?
Twitter is a complicated issue there. I mean, for Taiwan, Twitter is a very important platform because the Chinese influence is in a very low level. So you can see that, for example, our President Tsai Ing-wen is highly popular on Twitter, and most of the key opinion leaders in Americans, think tanks and the policy people, they are all on Twitter. So we have a direct channel, a direct interaction with a lot of important figures on Twitter. So, but there's a controversial figure like Trump and a lot of fake news there, and I think sometimes Twitter and some other big companies are overreacting to such controversial figures. So, for example, they banned the Trump's account. I think that's kind of an overreaction. But right now, Mr. Musk make it very complicated issue there. It's a chaotic one there. So I don't have a very good answer on that.
Yeah, I guess the same. It's very fresh. Many things are not known publicly yet, and I guess that everybody is just waiting for some more clear information from the Twitter. But meanwhile, we should do our best to help in not collapsing Twitter. Yeah, it's very hard to comment at this stage.
If there is no further questions from the audience, yeah?
I'm sorry, I had two questions. So do you have like any idea or advice how we can support you guys the most, like even from Hungary or like from all around the world?
You mean Ukraine or all of us?
Like all three of you. Like it's an open question.
Yeah, from Georgian perspective, Georgia is not heard properly, and of course, on the one hand, it's fair because all of our attention should be now directed towards Ukraine, and all of our resources should be there. And then there comes the question of Georgia, and it's not well represented. The one thing is that the officials are not doing enough to raise concerns about Georgia, but on the other hand, the researchers, academia, NGOs are trying to communicate the threats that Georgia currently faces. But still, I would say that the threats and challenges that Georgia is currently going through. I mean, how it's dragged out of NATO path, EU path, etc. I would say that having more Georgia in the spotlight, I don't know, in researches, in articles, in just some discussions, would really be a big support for the country.
Yes, I agree with my colleague because we need the same. We need to explain the world what is in Ukraine. We need to explain the world about Russia war against Ukraine. To have more help and to have understanding this situation in the world. We have media monitoring and we understand that our question need to be more in the media and more in the different spheres to be in this media and articles to know what has happened in Ukraine. It will be very helpful for us to share this information to the world and to the different audiences. We understand that Russia has different audiences that for spreading their disinformation, and of course we need reliable media that can just share the real facts about our situation.
Got very similar answer for that. Yes, because this geography very distant, very far away, right? But I think there's a common values between us. That is democratic values, and also just support for the civil society to know more about everything about politics, about world politics, and yeah, just everything is fine.
Well, I think we have actually run out of time, so I will have to close down this event. So I would like to thank all of our panelists for their great contributions and comments about the topics that have been mentioned. I would like to thank the audience here in the Central European University for being with us, and of course those who have been watched us online. Our gratitude goes to the Association for Sustainable Democracy for organizing this event, and to the Taipei Representative Office for their generous support. Thank you again, and have a nice evening.
Can we take a picture?